My reputation goes before me. And I'm supposed to, I guess, talk about the election. And I know that there are people from way beyond Hammersmith and Fulham here, and this is about far more than what's happening in this borough. And I know that we need to look at this strategically for the whole NHS, and I'm afraid I'm going to break all those rules. And I'm going to make a speech that's perhaps a bit more local and a bit more personal than that, and isn't about the election at all. And I'm going to talk about Charing Hospital. And in doing so, that's not to ignore everything else that's happening in the NHS and beyond these boundaries. But I think what's happening to that, one of the major teaching hospitals, one of the best hospitals, one of the biggest, and a relatively new hospital in London, is emblematic about what this government is doing to destroy the NHS. I remember growing up in Fulham in the 60s, I remember Charing Cross being built. My uncle worked as an electrician on the site, and sadly he died there only 5 years after it was built. And I guess everybody here who is local to West London will have their own very strong personal stories about Charing Cross that go back year after year and decade after decade. And sometimes you have to pinch yourself and stand back and think, what on earth is going on? As part of the research for tonight, I was Googling and I came across a debate in the House of Commons from 1993 by my predecessor, Clive Soley. And I'm just going to read the opening of that debate. Some of you will be old enough and been around enough to know what he was talking about. I'm grateful for this opportunity to debate the future of Charing Cross Hospital. I make no apologies for saying the purpose of this debate is to try and influence events. Following the recent publication of the London Implementation Group and Review reports, as well as earlier in the year the Tomlinson report, which led to the hospital's possible closure. And he goes on to talk about, and I won't read it, I haven't got time, but if you did read this, you would have thought it was written last week. It's about an attempt by politicians and bureaucrats to close that hospital. And he does say the hospital is 20 years old. And that in itself makes it special. It was purpose-built to a high standard of good facilities. The estimated cost of building and equipping it today would be some 450 million, £500 million. The hospital is on a 16-acre site. It's not only a good size, but allows flexibility in development. Well, it's 40 years old now. I still think it's a good hospital. I still think it's worth fighting for and preserving. There's a couple of things that are different from when Clive spoke. Firstly, he says it's not a particularly valuable site. I think that may have changed. And that hasn't helped us. And the other is, he thanks very much the Conservative MPs for Fulham and Brentford and Isleworth for coming along to his debate and joining in to support Charing Cross Hospital. Well, there's a sadness there. There is a real sadness, and I honestly wish that wasn't true. That the Angie Bray hearing, Mayor MacLeod in Brentford and Isleworth, Mayor Canvas in Fulham, and indeed the disgraceful council hearing who were rightfully booted out last year. Actually have campaigned for the demolition and closure of the main hospital in their area, the main hospital serving their constituents. And that, to my mind, just shows how warped the politics has become over that period of time, that we can't even find common cause on that. And let's go back 22 years, let's go back 2 years, or just over 2 years, when these proposals first came off. Let's remind ourselves what's happened in that period of time. Because a lot of water has passed under the bridge since I had the first meeting, the day after, or a couple of days after, we first had the shock of being told that 4 A&E departments, 2 major hospitals were under attack in West London. I sent out an email, didn't have time for anything else, and 250 people turned up instantly. And the campaign saved our hospitals built from there to what it is today. And I'll say a little bit more about the campaign in a second. But over that time, despite every effort, despite every week that, as Anne says, people have been out campaigning and working, I'm afraid that my constituents and everybody in West London has been treated with huge disrespect by the people who've been conducting this campaign. No proper public consultation, no independent review, completely ignoring both professional, clinical and also public opinion in what they want to push forward. And despite the fact that they moved from the complete demolition and sale of the site to what is now the sale of half the site and building primary care facilities on the other half, The basic premise has not changed over those 2.5 years. We will lose 93% of the inpatient beds. We will lose the best stroke unit in the country. We will lose all the emergency surgery and intensive treatment, and we will lose the A&E. And do not believe the lies that are told about what is going on the Charing Cross site. Thankfully, we don't have propaganda pumped out of this building anymore, telling us that everything's going to be all right, everything's going to be great. And I think now that the wool has been lifted from people's eyes, and people understand what is happening. But that doesn't mean it is a battle won. The surrounding circumstances of this are extraordinary. We have unprecedented population growth in this borough. They're talking about building 50,000 new homes over the next 20 years here, and we cannot cope already with the pressure on our A&E departments and hospitals. We've already had the closure of Hammersmith A&E, which has put unprecedented pressure on the other A&E departments. There was one day last month when only 50% of people at Northwick Park, with a brand new A&E, we're told, open, only 50% of people were seen within 4 hours. You had a 1 in 2 chance of being seen in less than 4 hours at that hospital. And at Charing Cross, it was in the low 60s before Christmas. That is not acceptable. It's not acceptable at the moment, let alone with the closures that are planned. So what I say to Mr. Hunt, who is not just a PR man, is not just a snake oil salesman, but is somebody whose job is there to privatise, to close down, and to make sure the NHS is not recognisable as we would wish to recognise it over that time, is that he's not going to get his way. No. And the reason he's not going to get his way is because you're here today, and this is a fantastic turnout today, and I thank you all for coming today, and because the people here, and everybody else, and I wish I could name them, but I can't, everybody else from Save Our Hospitals and the campaign who have worked so hard over the past 2.5 years. In the end, this isn't about statistics, this isn't about politicians, this is about everybody's ordinary human experience. And I've stood up in Parliament and I've said to David Cameron, I've told him the tales of people who have lined in the street in Hammersmith for 2 hours waiting for an ambulance. And one of the reasons for that is because when that ambulance wants to go to an A&E, it has to ring ahead and see if there's room at that A&E. And when it gets there, it has to queue. And when people get into the A&E, they have to wait for hours. And I've had people in their 80s and 90s waiting hours and hours and hours on trolleys or in chairs to get into hospitals, and then the next day you move to another hospital because there aren't beds. None of that is satisfactory in this country in the 21st century. And those simple facts, that simple human suffering is enough to say, firstly, that this government needs to go, and needs to go in May, and needs to be kicked out, and it needs to be kicked out above all because of what it's doing to the NHS. And secondly, and I end on this, that we will then rebuild the NHS. And I hope it is a Labour government, obviously, after May, and I hope it's a majority Labour government, and we will be in the same position that we were in 1997, when Thatcher had tried to run down and destroy the NHS over 18 years. And it has to be built from scratch. And that will cost money, but it will also cost the will of everybody to fight for the NHS, to ensure that we do not have privatisation, to ensure that we do look after particularly elderly people, that we do have a social care service that complements the NHS. And I believe that what Andy Burnham stands for on that, what Ed Miliband stands for on that, what the Labour Party stands for on that, is exactly the same as what Myra Bevan stood for in 1945. It is the Labour Party that built the NHS, it is the Labour Party that once again will save the NHS from this rotten Tory Liberal government. Thank you.